Hello, my name is Diane McKinley with Encompassing Education, and today I'm going to be talking to you about an overview of curriculum mapping. During this presentation, we're going to begin to understand why curriculum mapping is important to our students and how it benefits all students. We will learn to break down curriculum mapping into easy to manage steps, and finally, we'll discover what action is needed to complete each of the curriculum mapping steps. So let's begin with the question, why do we need curriculum maps? Well, as Larry Ainsworth states in the Rigorous Curriculum Design, the need for a cohesive and comprehensive curriculum that intentionally connects standards, instruction, and assessment has never been greater than it is today. For educators to meet the challenging learning needs of students, comprehend all standards, prepare for a variety of formative and summative assessments, and demonstrate proficiency on high-stakes standard or provincial tests, they must have a clear roadmap to follow throughout the school year. Well, that's a mouthful. Larry really does give us an idea of all that there is that goes into what needs to happen in a classroom in this day and age. Let's begin with a roadmap. When you have a roadmap, it is going to equal great success because it clearly specifies standards derived with student learning objectives. It includes the different categories of instructional strategies. Those categories can include research-based interventions, research-based practices, differentiation, interventions, English language learners, and special education. The roadmap also offers engaging learning experiences with 21st century learning skills built in. It provides an alignment of set standards and assessments to gauge student performance before, during, and after each unit of study. Assessments that are given before help us to differentiate during the lessons. Those during help us to make sure that students are on track and they check for understanding. And those after allow us to know what we need to do in order to intervene with students moving forward. The roadmap also includes enough detail to facilitate the writing of weekly and daily lesson plans. It's important to note that curriculum mapping is not daily lesson planning. It is instead the mapping of the entire school year so that we're working towards one common goal and we can set out our pacing in such a way that will enable students to be successful. Now, with vertical alignment, there are several things to take into account. In the state of Indiana, the Indiana State Standards are built on a vertical alignment. Those who use Common Core also have a vertical alignment so that standards build upon one another. It is imperative that each grade level understands that many of the standards that you're teaching in your grade may not be brand new standards to students. Of course, there's an exception for kindergarten, but for most other grades, they're building upon other standards that were already set out. And teachers need to know what is expected of students in their grade level below them, as well as the grade level that is above theirs. This enables teachers to know the depth to which he or she needs to teach the standard. Standards that are not brand new to your grade level are ones that you're going to be building on. So it's important to know what the grade level before has done, has covered, and the depth of knowledge to which they've addressed those standards so that you can pick up there and begin to move on with students in your grade level. When teachers do not fully understand the vertical alignment, they often reteach standards at the basic level again and again, and thus never reach that depth of knowledge required at your grade level. That is important so that students can build a robust understanding of concepts and continue to build their knowledge year after year. Now, curriculum mapping really does help to meet the needs of all students. Oftentimes, teachers are concerned that if we create units of study and a pacing guide, that we will be moving on to another unit of study before students have really comprehended and grasped all of the components of that particular unit. Well, that's the exact opposite of what curriculum mapping does in the rigorous curriculum design. Instead, these units are set up for 4 to 6 weeks. So in Unit 1, there would be a pre-test given, and then instruction that is differentiated based on that pre-assessment for the 4 to 6 week period of time. At the end of that unit, a post-assessment would be given. The post-assessment allows us to know what needs to happen during a 1 week buffer time. For those students who have mastered standards, they will be doing enriching activities. For those that need some additional time, they have an additional week for reteaching and further differentiation. After that, it's time to move on to Unit 2, so a pre-assessment would begin. However, you might still have students who did not pick up the information even after the buffer week. Unit 1, a 1-week buffer, so that is between 5 and 7 weeks. After that, they may still need some additional assistance, and that is when they would get differentiation during their Tier 2 time. That will happen during Unit 2, enabling them to have additional work on those skills for another 4 to 6 week period of time. While that is happening, Unit 1 is also being taught. Therefore, these students do not get behind. If we stop all further instruction and just continue to work on the things that they do not yet have, they are missing out on the next set of instruction that needs to be happening, thus putting them farther and farther behind. With this model, students are still exposed to grade level standards while being differentiated and intervened on for those standards that they need additional assistance. Now let's begin to look at how we actually do the curriculum mapping process. There are 5 easy steps in the curriculum mapping process. Larry Ainsworth describes this in his big picture view. The first one is to unwrap the standards and examine the vertical alignment. The second is to prioritize the standards. The third is to place the standards into units. The fourth is to create a scope and sequence. And the fifth is to build the units of study. Let's listen to Larry as he explains this.
Before previewing the rigorous curriculum design model and its various steps, I'd like to give a brief overview of what I call the systems approach, or the big picture, to show how all those components actually are fitting together to prepare students for success on assessments. So I'd call this, as I mentioned, the big picture, because it begins with the state standards, Common Core state standards at the bottom, and then the state assessments, and then the coming national assessments at the top. And then right in the middle, you see a square, which I call the organizing building block of the whole model. It's the rigorous curricular unit of study based on the unwrapped priority Common Core state standards. Now, that's a mouthful, but basically what that means is we're going to be, first of all, prioritizing the Common Core so that we have the priority standards and the supporting standards clearly decided. And then all of those standards are going to be placed into units of study, and those units will then be scoped and sequenced, which means, for example, in a 6th grade class for math, we would know the units of study, and then we would know what order those units would be taught. But within each one of those units, all of those priority and supporting standards that have already been prioritized will actually be housed, so to speak, in the units for the grade level. And then what occurs around each one of the units themselves is a common formative pre-assessment followed by the data team's analysis. And then the teaching begins, the unit ensues. The teachers are using quick checks for understanding along the way. And as the unit completes or nears completion, a post-assessment is given. And again, the data team or the instructional data team meets to diagnose student learning needs, find out which kids were doing well, which kids need further instruction, remediation, and so on. In fact, this last component is before they move on to the next unit of study, there's a period of what we call the buffer week. It might just be a couple days, couple class periods, but during that buffer, children that still need a little bit more instruction receive remediation, or they may need some further intervention. The kids that are demonstrating proficiency at the end of that unit are going to receive enrichment. And the idea is that these practices of the common formative pre and post assessment with the instructional strategies, the checks along the way, the data analysis, and then the plan to continuously meet the needs, the learning needs of the students, that will circulate around each one of those units of study. And the idea is if we align those units then with what students will need to demonstrate on state assessments and then eventually these Smarter, Balanced, and PARCC assessments, we will get predictive value in terms of what do we need to do from a formative assessment point of view so that we can move students toward proficiency on those summative national assessments. So that's what I call the big picture, and it helps people to understand as they begin the rigorous curriculum design process that every single one of the components that you see on screen is intentionally aligned and connected to all the others. So it does create that systems approach to student achievement.
So as Larry explained, there is a systems approach to how we do our curriculum mapping. Now, finally, let's talk about what we will need to do in order to do the curriculum mapping throughout the year. So the first step was to unwrap the standards. When we're doing that in professional development, that is the creation of the I-CAN statements, which the Indiana Department of Education has given us those at this point, and the creation of objectives. Objectives let teachers know what the students should know and how they're going to know they know it. The second step will be prioritizing the standards. We'll be using the IDOE blueprints and the vertical alignment that's provided by the IDOE as well. The third piece is to place the standards into units. We'll be determining groupings and the timing for each of those, so whether it's a 4-week unit or a 6-week unit. Fourth, we'll create a scope and sequence. We'll do this by building a 10-month map. We also call it a pacing guide, and this will give us the order and the timing that we determined in step 3. For step 5, we will build out the units of study. There are many components that go into the unit of study. To begin with, we work on creating pre- and post assessments as well as check for understanding. Then we will plan engaging lessons with performance tasks. We will then determine the specific vocabulary, build in 21st century learning skills, specify curricular materials, and plan for differentiation. I hope that this overview has helped you to understand a little bit more about the big picture of curriculum mapping. I am looking forward to working with you soon.